May 24th, the day before George Floyd was killed, I had 25 employees, 5 on furlough, trying to figure out what this COVID thing was going to look like. George Floyd's killed May 25th. June 1st, I believe, was the Monday. My phone started ringing. I've hired employee number 84 last week. And so that's what the past 18 months have been like.
Media, it's Give 'em the Business, a show about Black entrepreneurs and business leaders sharing their stories of adversity and success. I'm Troy Evans, and on today's show, my guest is Ahmad Islam, CEO and founding partner of 1035. The world of creative advertising and marketing has few multicultural agencies that play on the biggest stages. 1035 is one of those agencies that have earned the reputation for quality, creativity, and understanding culture. But this level of success was not achieved without adversity. It took co-founder and CEO Ahmad Islam several years of mastering the marketing world before he was ready to try his hand at entrepreneurship. 1035 has a Chicago address, which is only a few hours drive from Southern Ohio, where Ahmad first explored his creative roots.
I was that kid that at probably 12 told my dad that I was leaving and I wasn't going to come back. And honestly, getting out and getting away was a part of what drove me. 'Cause I know not only did I grow up in Southern Ohio, but I grew up in small town Southern Ohio, Springfield. And so I think, part of it is, I think the person that I've become, I think there's still a little bit of a Midwest sensibility to my personality. And I think that's a result of where I grew up. But also I think that drive and that desire, because I knew that I wanted to get out, get away, see and experience new things, was also a part of what really drove me. I went to undergrad in Ohio, so I stayed in Ohio, went to Miami. But then from there, I really went out and took every opportunity, but made every effort to experience things and see the world. It's crazy. I have a 16-year-old and an 18-year-old now, and the things that they've seen, the things that they've experienced, both through just technology and how the world is now, but also just through the opportunities I've been blessed to give them, very different. My first time really leaving the state for an extended period of time was in undergrad when we started taking road trips with our fraternity brothers.
So you decided to stay in Ohio, which I couldn't do for undergrad. I had to get out quicker because I had the same motivation that you did. And you go to Miami down in Southern Ohio. And did you know that you were interested in the advertising world at that point in time, or is that something that you discovered?
I did not, man. I knew marketing. I felt like marketing was what I wanted to do. Full transparency, at the time, I didn't know what an advertising agency was. I knew marketing was what I wanted to do. My path, I tell people this all the time. I go talk to young people about my journey, and I say I'd love to tell you that I planned this out from the time I was 15, step by step. But I tell people all the time, I'm really good at what I do. I've been blessed, and I've also been a little lucky. And so I think as I went through the process, I learned very quickly when I was an undergrad that I had a high level of interest in marketing. I didn't like finance and accounting. And at the business school in Miami, you have finance and accounting prerequisites to be in the business school. Well, I ended up finding this little loophole called business psychology. And the way the business psych degree was set up, you actually had to finish an entire psych curriculum in the School of Arts and Sciences, and then you took business electives. And so I ended up becoming a business psych major. Again, being a psych major with a emphasis in marketing has had a great deal of impact on how I approach things strategically and how my brain works now. I'd love to say that was how I planned it. It wasn't, but I approach marketing now, I approach strategy, I approach creating meaningful connections with consumers from a psych-based perspective now, because that was really what my education was in early on. And then I went on and got my master's in sports management at West Virginia, and really started to put it together at that point.
So looking for that loophole, I would imagine had because advertising is all about the psychology and behavior of buying and all of those things. So looking for that loophole really paid dividends. Down the line.
And like I said, I'd love to say it was intentional. I was running from finance and accounting at the time, trying to figure out how to get in all these marketing and management classes without having to take finance and accounting. But yeah, it definitely, I think, shaped the way that I, to this day, because I take a very humanistic approach to how I think about strategy, how I think about helping my brands connect with consumers, because a lot of times it's less about, I ask my team all the time, it's like, do you want to sell your work the way you want to sell it, or do you want to sell your work? And sometimes selling the work is understanding the psychology of either the client you're working with or the consumer that you're trying to connect outside of the context of what you want or what you think.
So you're at Miami. You've stumbled to some degree into this business psychology with an emphasis on marketing. Is that where you started to understand, I'm going to want to go into the advertising world?
That was where I started to understand that I wanted to do marketing. I think what happened was I started interviewing for jobs, like everybody else early in my senior year. And honestly, what I realized was the types of opportunities that I was interviewing with the P&Gs, all the schools that come to recruit in Miami. And I realized that wasn't what I wanted to do. So I started to become familiar with what I did not want to do. I went and talked to one of my advisors, a brother by the name of Dr. Othello Harris, who's one of my professors. And I was just telling him, I'm trying to figure it out, and he asked me, what do you like? And I played sports my entire life, played baseball as a freshman at Miami, decided after that I wanted to be a full-time student, because being a D1 baseball player with not getting any money was just not a job I wanted to have. So I told him, I said, I still, marketing is my thing. I mean, I figured that out. I still love sports. I'm still very interested in sports. So he asked me if I'd ever thought of a career in sports marketing. I didn't know that was a thing. And so again, this is part of my exposure to the opportunities that exist in the world and things that I just didn't see or hear about growing up in Springfield, Ohio. So yeah, that sounds interesting. This is where the network starts to come in. He had a colleague by the name of Dr. Dana Brooks, who was running the School of Physical Education at West Virginia. He picked up the phone and had one of those, hey, I have a kid conversations, right? And so fast forward, I ended up going to West Virginia for graduate school straight out of undergrad, in part because I still had an idea of what I wanted to do, but I wasn't sure. And so I ended up at West Virginia. Interestingly enough, the way that program was set up, I could get the majority of my coursework done in 1 year and then go off and do an internship. And so I ended up, and again, this is one of those kind of really good, blessed, and lucky parts of the story. We had to do an internship, and the majority of my classmates were, applying to 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 internships. I applied to one. Again, I would love to say I was that good. I was also probably a little arrogant and a little lucky. It was Nike. So I applied to Nike as an intern, dating myself a little bit. I come home, I check the mail, and I have a ding letter, basically saying, sorry, but thanks, but no thanks. I go in the house and I have a message on the answering machine, dating myself, asking me if I could get on the phone to do an interview for an internship with Nike later that week. And so did the interview, got the internship, and that's what kind of started me down the path of, kind of the beginning of my postgraduate career, which started with Nike.
And talk to me a little bit about, before we jump into that, the cultural experiences you were having, one, going to Miami, right? And then two, going to West Virginia, which is, going in my mind, that's going to be even, more of a challenge than Miami. Yeah. Talk to me about what you were seeing and realizing from a cultural perspective.
I think it's very interesting. I grew up in a very Black family, very Black household, but in a world that was sometimes very Black, but then I could literally venture to the other side of town where I went to high school for my last 2 years of high school. That was in fact a very white world. Miami was the same way, 15,000 students at the time, maybe 400 Black students, but a very tight knit community of Black students. And so the experience for me, I think, kind of knowing what I was getting into, again, it's helped shape me in terms of, where I kind of sit from a professional standpoint. I think I am very unapologetic in my Blackness as a marketer and my respect for and my commitment to uplifting the culture. But I also understand how the rest of the world works. And I understand how to put things into the proper context and understand the impact that a decision made over here through the lens of Blackness can have on the rest of the world, or how the rest of the world perceives things.
You get exposed to the Nike internship at West Virginia. What project did you work on? How did you fall in love with it?
It gave me an opportunity to get my first exposure just within the Nike organization, but also just really my first real world work experience. I mean, you think about like today's world, most people are leaving undergrad, going to work for a couple of years, and then going back to get an MBA or graduate school. So going straight from undergrad to grad, I basically had been in college for 5.5 years, and now getting into the work world. And so completed my project and was done with my coursework. So there was nothing to go back to school for. So I ended up getting a full-time job with Nike, working in consumer services. And so basically answering the phone and listening to, consumer complaints about product or a commercial that we did. And Nike as an organization, I think, is very, very responsive to their customer base. And so that was a interesting job for me in terms of just really kind of learning a broad range of the company, because those calls can come in about anything. And so it was great for me, I think, to kind of have the internship and learn kind of customer service and some of those areas of the company that, while primary might possibly a little less sexy, are also some of the things that are critical to just the overall driving and the growth of the business.
So I had a similar experience at American Express. I worked on the Black Card, do an internship while I was at Clark Atlanta University. A part of that job was listening to the customer service calls that were coming in and understanding what the consumer was ultimately asking for. And one of the things I remember taking away from that was that they really just wanted you to acknowledge that you heard what they were requesting.
It's a little bit of a lesson in empathy, right?
Right, definitely.
Yeah, this is where the story gets interesting. So, if you know anything about Nike, their business is done on futures. And so they actually have fairly regular layoffs. Have historically had fairly regular layoffs. I got laid off probably 7-8 months after I started in customer service. And I was in the process of interviewing for a job called Eakin. And it's basically in promotional marketing, and had kind of started going through the process when I got laid off. When they laid me off, they told me that, we actually want to bring you back, but you've been here for 6-7 months. We're letting people go that have been here for years, so we got to let you go right now. So, candidly, a humbling experience early in my career. I think, it also taught me a lesson in bounce back that I think I carried with me and would leverage later in my career in terms of being resilient and not necessarily taking a setback as that, but looking at it as an opportunity. So being a little bit of an opportunist, one of my fraternity brothers, one of my good friends, had just gotten drafted by the Bengals. And so I literally packed up all the belongings that I had accumulated in my first 7 months of adult independence in Oregon and drove to Cincinnati, and was basically a pro athlete's best friend for about 6-7 months. And in that time, though, what happened was there was, a lot of the people that I had gone to school with in Miami were now in the Cincinnati business community. And so I started connecting the dots between the business community and the athletes that I was close to because of my roommate and the relationships that I had, and started putting together, marketing deals. Started getting guys local appearances, getting guys, different deals with local banks. And it was, it was good because it started to teach me the hustle and what was possible when you had the right relationships, had a little bit of creativity, had a little bit of grind and hustle in that space. Back to grandma, I went home probably about 6-7 months into this, and literally had the, as grandma could say it, the "what the hell are you doing" conversation. And I reached back out to Nike like, "Hey guys, what's going on?" And, it was just one of those, "Hey, your timing is perfect. We're getting ready to get things ramped back up. We want to get you in the interview." And I interviewed, got the job, spent the next several years taking several different roles in Nike, each one, a promotion. So I was climbing very quickly. The reality of Nike is, in marketing, all roads point to Oregon. And having been there, I knew that I wasn't necessarily looking to go back, which is at the point that I decided it was time for me to leave. And so I actually ended up going to work at an agency in Minneapolis called Campbell Methune. So this was my first foray into the agency world. And again, back to being really good, being lucky, being blessed, I was looking for client side marketing jobs. So I was looking to get on the brand side, starting to think about, do I need to go to grad school, get an MBA, and wasn't thinking about agency at all. Got a call from a recruiter who was recruiting for this job at Campbell Methune, which is an agency in Minneapolis. And it was interesting because, again, dating myself, they found me on Monster doing keyword searches. And because I had worked at Nike, had footwear experience, had apparel experience, the client that they were hiring for was looking for someone that had experience running footwear and apparel businesses. So I popped up in this keyword search. Was living in Houston at the time. My first stint in Houston, and interviewed, and Nike was pressuring me to come to Oregon. And I was just like, what? I was in what I call the fuck it phase in my life, where I was like, what? Never been to Minneapolis. I know I'm not going to Oregon. This agency thing sounds interesting. Fuck it. And took the job. Went to Minneapolis and was there for 1 year and learned two things. One, learned that I love the agency business. And two, I hated Minneapolis. And so I was getting married that September, and had already decided that once I got through the wedding, I was going to start looking. Leo Burnett called me in July, and I interviewed and got hired. So I literally moved, started a new job for about 3 weeks, and then went and got married. And that's kind of how I got on the path to Leo. And this was in 2000. So went and started what was now kind of the path to my success in the agency business. But I started running from Oregon, not wanting to go there with Nike, ended up kind of almost by accident at this agency in Minneapolis, where I started to really kind of build my passion for advertising and that kind of the true agency side of the business.
And it sounds like, so you clearly crisscrossed the country several times, and which goes into that fuck it mentality, because you got to be willing to say, I'm going to try new things, which hinders a lot of people, right? Wanting to stay in their comfort zone.
I told people I made decisions to go where opportunity was earlier in my career so I could do whatever the hell I wanted later. And that's where I'm at now. I live in Chicago sometime. I live in Houston sometime. I spent a month in Mexico during the pandemic. Now I have the freedom and the flexibility because I made those sacrifices early on to get to the point where I could make the decisions I make now.
And you mentioned that you were getting ready to get married right when you took that job. How do you even find the time to build a relationship when you are crisscrossing the country?
I mean, it was crazy. And candidly, my now ex-wife was a soldier through this whole process. And I think, part of being a successful entrepreneur, behind any successful entrepreneur, there are some people that believe in them, that are willing to make the sacrifices to help them get to where they are. And I have absolutely had that throughout the entirety of my journey, whether it's family, whether it's my ex, my kids as they got older, my business partner, friends. There's always been people that have been in my corner, that believed in me, that believed in the vision, believed in the things that I was trying to do. And I had a woman when I was at Nike tell me I wrote something, and it was something I just did on my own, but it was related to the business. And she literally was somebody I looked up to, and she told me, she was like, "What are you doing?" She's like, you need to be off doing something else. Like this, what you wrote, this creativity that you have that you don't really have a chance to fully flex in your current role. You need to go find something to do that's going to allow you to really use your talents. And that stuck with me. And that was probably a year and a half before I left. But I think what I realized is that there was a bigger world out there. Again, I went from barely having left Ohio to West Virginia to Oregon. And then I kind of started New York City, Pittsburgh, Houston. And so I started to move around and see and experience things that all kind of fed into the professional, the entrepreneur, the person that I was going to become.
So you now are at Leo Burnett. What are you working on there, and where does that lead you?
So I was hired to come work on the U.S. Army. And it was interesting because I had done a fair amount of it's funny now because I look back on it and laugh, but what was considered pretty innovative digital work at Campbell Methune. And so Leo won the U.S. Army. The entire pitch that they made was digitally based, because it was government. They also needed to make sure they had some diversity and leadership. So there were a variety of reasons why they came and got me. I spent, 3 very challenging but fun, enjoyable, educational years working at Leo. It was funny when I was interviewing, I was digging my heels in over $5,000. And the recruiter told me, she said, "Look, you are getting ready to go get a PhD, to get paid to get a PhD in advertising. Don't trip. Trust me." And I was kind of like, all right, it's $5,000 is $5,000, but I'm gonna go ahead and do it. And she was right. I got an accelerated, advanced understanding of, as I affectionately call it, the game. Working at Leo on a government piece of business, working with some of the most, I still think, dope senior professionals, both creatively, strategically, and from a business standpoint, that I've ever worked with. And so I was fortunate enough to work with some really amazing people, to do some great work. But what I also learned was, because it was a government piece of business, we had subcontract agencies. So, and those were all minority owned, women owned, veteran owned. And so the first year and a half, I spent just working on the general market side of the business, creating this campaign called the Army of One that we created that, won a bunch of awards, but just doing traditional advertising. I tell people, I don't know if it was a fit of insanity or what, I kind of raised my hand and said, hey, this over here, meaning the relationships with the subcontractors, the multicultural side of the business, it was a little bit of a mess. And I said, hey, let me go work on that. And so in the process, what I learned was that, candidly, at that time, especially, the bar for cultural agencies was far lower than the bar for general market agencies. And I felt like there was just a gap and an opportunity to create an agency in the space that, took a little bit of a different approach, brought some individuals together who came from a slightly different background than what was in that space historically. And so, making a long story short, I met my business partner, Sherman, probably back in early 03, late 02, early 03. And we started working on a business plan, and we put that together. The story is we call it the business plan in the sand, because the story is I was in Cancun, had just found out that my ex was pregnant with my first child. I'm trying to get away from all things Chicago, the snow, people, everything for a week. I look to my right and there's Sherman. And, he and I are fraternity brothers, two of the senior African Americans in big white agencies in Chicago. So people knew who we knew who each other were, but we had never really sat and talked. And we spent that week doing what we called the business plan in the sand and really kind of just building, tequila fueled creativity, just having conversation, realizing that we were both being courted by a lot of the same companies who were looking to build into this thing called multicultural and, and having conversations about a lot of the same jobs, and just got to a point where we realized that our skill sets were complementary, but also very different. And we started working on this business plan, man. And we worked on it for a little over a year. And we were blessed to have mentors and advisors and people at the agencies that we were working at, or people that we had worked for, that helped us shape this thing until we got to a point where they were all saying, stop talking and quit. Go do it. Like, you guys have done the legwork, which I think is a part of, people always ask, well, when did you guys know where you were going to make it? We had a plan. And I think unlike a lot of entrepreneurs that, especially youngins today, and it's hard for me to tell them no, because it's a different world from what I started in. But I think, a lot of people just jump out there and fly by the seat of their pants. I mean, we got out there and had a plan when we got out there. And trust me, it was still, a lot of the same struggles that you hear from any entrepreneur. Those things were there, but we had a vision and we had a plan. And when we stuck to that plan, as we went through the years.
After the break, Ahmad launches his business with a plan, but did he account for everything? I'm Troy Evans, and you're listening to Give 'em the Business. Give 'em the Business is sponsored by Oasis Vacations. You deserve the luxury vacation of your dreams. Don't leave your travel accommodations to chance, and take the worry out of your next destination vacation. Be well traveled and visit vacationwithoasis.com. Give 'em the Business is sponsored by The Funnel Creative. The Funnel Creative's mission is to empower Black crew and content creators to bring your visual production to life. To learn more, visit us at thefunnelcreative.com. We're talking with Ahmad Islam, co-founder and CEO of 1035. Ahmad paid his dues and gained industry expertise, cutting his teeth at advertising agencies and Fortune 500 companies across the U.S. But now he wants to take the leap into entrepreneurship. What will it take to pull the trigger and quit his job? And will it go according to plan? And so, if I'm counting correct, you've probably got about 7 or 8 years of domain experience in the marketing world at this point in time. So, so you know your space now, right?
Yep.
You see the opportunity in the multicultural space. Mm-hmm. You've identified a partner that complements your skill set. Yep. And you put the research in, which, like you said, is a key component that is often missing. Now you just got to pull the trigger and execute. Yep. What was there a moment that it was just like, okay, I got to do it. I got to quit. I got to make this leap. I got the faith now. Was there anything that
Sherman quit first. It was funny because we were both going to quit, and he quit, and I was traveling. I was busy. Then I came back, and my boss was out of town, and I wanted to just give him the courtesy of doing it. So it was probably like 2 or 3 weeks that went by before I quit. And it's funny because he tells a story about the conversation he and his wife were having, during that period from when he quit to when he was waiting on me to quit. But yeah, we just, man, we had a little bit of money, so because we both had, we had newborns, our kids, both our oldest kids, his daughter is 7 weeks younger than my son. They've grown up with the company. My son was born in April of 2003. His daughter was born in May of 2003. We both quit. He quit in December of 2003. I quit in January, and we launched the company. And so that pressure has always been there, just from family, from kids. People are always like, y'all just both bought homes, you got babies, and you quit. I mean, VPs. We were VPs, and to quote my grandmother, you quit that good job to go do what? And so it was just time, bro. And I think for me, the point where I realized I had to go was when I asked myself, what's the worst thing that could happen? And the worst thing that could happen was I got to go get another job. And by that point, I was pretty good at that shit. So it was like, all right, if I got to go get another job, some big agency is going to hire me, if not the one I've been working at for the past 3 or 4 years. So if that's the worst thing that happens, I'll go get the job.
Yeah, I often tell people when they're asking me about, making a decision of like upside, downside, right? Like, and just evaluating that landscape. It's funny though, when I was on the entrepreneur path, when my wife got pregnant and we were both on the entrepreneur path, and that's what caused me to go get a job. And I was like, I don't know if I should have, got sidetracked for 10 years, on that process, but because it does take some wherewithal to withstand because in a lot of ways the job is the easy route, right?
Right.
And especially when you got all those commitments and whatnot.
That's what I tell people. That's what I tell people all the time. People are like, well, what's, I say the difference between, there are a lot of entrepreneurial people out there that have full-time jobs and side hustles. The difference between entrepreneurial and entrepreneur jumps. And they make their side hustle their main thing. I said, and that's what separates entrepreneurial people from true entrepreneurs, and I think what we're seeing in today's world is that there's a lot more entrepreneurs than just entrepreneurial people, because there's also so much more opportunity, man. I mean, I think just technology, the way the world is right now, I think that I saw a stat that there have been more Black entrepreneurs created in the past 18 months since the death of George Floyd than at any other 18-month period ever. And those are the types of things that I think are amazing, and how the world is in some ways different from the world that I made the leap in.
And so you said you got a little bit of money when you're getting ready to start the business.
Yep.
What did it take? Did you have a contract already like lined up where you knew that you didn't need as much capital, or what
we did not. About? No, we did not. We literally we had enough money to give us about a 1-year runway of not getting any clients and being able to keep our families comfortable before it was going to become a problem. So we gave ourselves a year. We didn't have any clients. We had a vision. We had a positioning that we felt was unique. And we had our pedigree. I think that's the other thing that separated us. Because to your point, my business partner had about the same. Matter of fact, he might have had a little more experience than me, because I had done the Nike thing, but versus my agency time. And so what we started to see happen was we would get in front of brands, and candidly, it was typically white men. And the conversations would start with them arms folded, having taken this meeting with us because somebody that, they knew asked them, hey, meet with these guys. And the first question was normally, well, before you started your own, your little agency, what did you do? And, my business partner was, I was a vice president at Upshot, an agency that everybody had heard about in Chicago, running a big piece of their Coca-Cola business, and I'm like, well, I was a vice president at Leo, running a big piece of the Army business. Prior to that, I was, 5 years at Nike in a variety of sales and marketing capacities. The arms came down, because now it's like, oh, okay, you guys actually know what the hell you're doing. So now let's talk about the agency and what that is, and how you might be able to help us, or how we might be able to help you through with an opportunity, with a project, all the types of things that you want when you're getting started as a company. But that came from the experience that we had, and being able to overcome that barrier of, do you know what you're doing? Because we had played the game in these big agencies at the highest level and proven ourselves there. So there was less reticence to give us an opportunity as a startup agency.
The agency, which is Common Ground,
right,
is just you and Sherman?
It's me and Sherman, and our first hire was an operations person. And I really kind of say she was a woman Friday. Her background was HR, we just needed somebody that could do a whole bunch of stuff. And we knew that as the organization grew, we were going to be trying to take people from these bigger companies. So things like benefits and all those things are going to be important. And so we hired somebody that could kind of play an administrative role, but also as we grew, play more of an HR role and kind of help to start to put some of the things in place to actually build the type of organization that we needed to build. And so I think we have always made decisions with an eye toward what we want to be and where we want to be versus where we are. And I think that started with our first hire. Our first hire, like I said, wasn't a creative. It was literally somebody that was going to help us operationalize the organization as we grew.
And so it's three of you all for the start of the business, which means that you all are doing a lot of the executional work, which I imagine coming from your agencies, you had teams doing a lot of that, I would imagine. And so now you back into the detail oriented part of it. You know, was that an easy shift to get back into that lane because it's your own, or did that come with some challenges?
It was easy, man. I've always liked the details. I think it was easy. And to your point, it was ours. And so I think it's different when you want to be hands-on because you're building it. And, you know, I think it's funny. I have a guy that worked for me for several years that just left to go work in his startup. And it's great. I mean, it's amicable. I'm on the board of the startup. You know, we still have a great relationship. But it was interesting because he called me a couple weeks ago and was like, bruh, like, I need some more people. And he routed off like 6 people that he needed. And I was like, well, guess what? 5 of those are you. Right. You know, you know, you talking like you still work with me. You know, 5 of those are you. And I think we understood that going in. I think, again, back to the differences in our skill sets. Sherman has always been more operationally inclined and loves the operations side. I've been more creatively inclined, but we both overlap and could support each other when we needed to. And so, you know, Sherman's been very strategic. I'm more creative with a strategic bent. You know, he likes operations. I like dealing with clients. And so the marriage has always been, I think, strong because our skill sets and our interests have been complementary, but we can also do the other stuff. So we could always help fill in, you know, advise or whatever, whenever we needed to. So that made it, I think, a very strong partnership in terms of how we work together as we built. But yeah, neither one of us, we hadn't been senior long enough to forget what it was like to roll our sleeves up. So we didn't have a problem with that. Gotcha. And it was ours.
So I recall you saying earlier in this conversation that you ran from finance when you were an undergrad, and now you're running your own business in which finance is going to be an integral part of its success over the long term. Talk to me about the business side of launching your business. And I also want to know about your first client and when did you know that you were starting to get that momentum going? But, you know, what business challenges did you have? And then when did you start to build that momentum?
I mean, it's interesting, man. I think a lot of people, you know, when you hear entrepreneurial struggles, you know, stories, you hear about the struggles of early on. And, you know, I had to sell the rights to my first child to keep the lights on. And we didn't have any of those problems, man. I mean, and I think our challenges came later, you know, after we had gotten, you know, actually, you know, thought we had made it. I think, you know, just running the business, you know, our partnership was kind of set up perfectly for that. You know, Sherman knew enough about the operational side, the financial side, you know, running QuickBooks. And that was our, you know, probably our 5th hire was somebody just to manage the money. Even though we didn't have a lot of it, it was still understanding that we needed somebody that understood, you know, QuickBooks and just the basic stuff that you do, that you run, as a startup business, and taking those things kind of off of us, being able to go off and run a little payroll and do those things allowed us to focus on growing the business. And so that's why I think we made those strategic hires that were more support people, because they freed us up to go do the things that other people couldn't do, which at that time was to build and sell the organization. You know, our very first client was, and again, I tell people all the time, you know, it's interesting in these industries where, and I think this just is business. You know, brands are happy to be 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th, but they're hesitant to be first. And so that first big opportunity, that first client typically has to come from somebody either you know or somebody that needs you, right? And so our very first opportunity came from a brother who was in Chicago. He was actually running a spirits brand. And he came to us and just said, hey, my boy sent me to you guys, said y'all have an agency, do y'all buy media? We ain't have a media buyer. But, you do what you do. Like, yeah, we can buy media for you. Told us what the budget was. And we literally said, hey, you know what? You got $75,000 that you want to buy media on for a year. Why don't you let us take that 75 and come back to you with a different thought? And so we actually created a sampling program for him that had a lot more impact on his business and his ability to literally drive sales than anything he could have done running radio ads that we would have bought the media for and probably done a creative for. And so that was our first client. And the good thing about it was the program we created was somewhat high profile in the city of Chicago. And so people wanted to know like who was doing it. And it's this new agency, these new brothers, Ahmad and Sherman, Common Ground, blah, blah, blah. And so our name started to get out there. Meanwhile, I think we're making the rounds at all the little supplier diversity stuff and all those things. And candidly, I had a bad attitude about them because when I worked at Leo, I sat on the other side of the table. And so I knew when we went into those things, we typically weren't expecting to find good agencies. I think in the agency business and really in marketing, there's still a bit of a stigma that's attached to any resource that comes through supplier diversity because they feel like they're doing it because they have to, not because these people are good, right? But we met a woman who worked at Miller Brewing at the time at a supplier diversity conference. And I jokingly say all the time that we're a supplier diversity person's, wet dream because we actually are minority owned, but we know what we're doing. And so we always have the ability to go in and have real meaningful conversations with brand people, even early on is more what I'm talking about. But what we ended up doing was this woman set up some meetings with some folks in marketing at Miller Brewing at the time. Again, one of those arms folded to arms down scenarios. And by the time the meeting was over, the guy we met basically said, hey, you know what? I've got some people you might want to talk to. And we picked up our first project from Miller Brewing on the Miller Genuine Draft brand. And it was interesting because right around the time that we had just finished doing some print and radio, so now we've produced our first creative, we got real work that we put out into the world, their company got into a little bit of trouble. They were putting out a collection of commemorative cans commemorating the greatest rock and roll artist of all time. And honestly, by no fault of their own, because they tried and just couldn't get the deals done, but there were no brothers on any of the cans. No James Brown, no Chuck Berry, none of the black people that had a huge role in the history of rock and rolls. All white people on the cans. So they started getting killed. And they came to us and one of the general market agencies. This was on a holiday weekend. It was either like 4th of July or Memorial Day. They came to us on a Friday and said, hey guys, what should we do? We need ideas by top of next week. And so we created a program and, part of it was saying, hey, you know what? You can apologize and do all these things, but if you're sincere about celebrating Black achievement in music, and if you're serious about actually having a committed relationship with the community and you want to sell some beer, here's what you should do. And we created a music program that elevated Black artists, that created a connection in the community, and they bought it. And I'll never forget, probably a year later at the finality of that program, Sherman and I are in the balcony at Hammerstein Ballroom in New York watching, several hundred people have an amazing time with Luda, Missy Elliott, Erykah Badu, and Common on stage as a finale for this program that we created in our little ass conference room, almost a year before. And so that was the point when it was like, oh shit, like this thing is actually going to work. And we actually, are good at this. And so that was, kind of our first break and it just rolled from there, man.
And so that's about a year before you get to that point from launching, right?
Yeah.
So you're like what 04-ish right now?
Late 04, early 05.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so that's when it starts to click.
Mm-hmm.
this gamble is going to pay off.
Yeah.
We got to continue to double down and continue to put resources, continue to hire the best talent.
Yep.
Talk to me about growth. Talk to me about, when the success comes, a lot of entrepreneurs talk about that's some of the most challenging times because they got to manage that growth. How quickly did you grow? What obstacles did you have to overcome? What was the size of the organization?
Common Ground grew fairly quickly. I think, big challenges. I mean, capital, cash flow, money, it's always a challenge, because clients don't cater to a small business. I mean, ultimately, part of what we've learned over the years is, and part of why we are where we are now, is having the ability to operate financially like these big agencies where, there's a point in time when it's like, if my terms with the client were 30 days, on day 28, I was like, you're going to send that check in 2 days, right? And so, we went through those times, man. We went through those times. We were fortunate to, again, have some relationships that helped us get some banking relationships that really allowed us to start to operate a bit more autonomously. But I tell people all the time, man, growth is the blessing and the curse. It is, because I think finding the right people is always, finding good people is always a challenge. Maintaining and managing culture as you grow is always a challenge. Just little things like, outgrowing your space and needing to find a new space and move while you're still in the process of building the organization. We moved 3 times. In the time that we had Common Ground, and each move was to a bigger space, a better space. But it also just, was a bit disruptive. And I think the financial stuff that comes with that. And so I think we always looked at how we could manage growth. But I think, again, part of it was that philosophy that we had about always planning based on where we wanted to be versus where we were. And so I think that really started to pay off as we grew. At its height, Common Ground was probably, I think we were right around 100, 110 people. And that was really over a 10-year period. So, from 04 to around 14, when we actually sold Common Ground, we went from, Sherman and I and our operations manager in, a little 1-room office on Michigan Avenue to 110 people between offices in Chicago and New York.
And what was the size of the revenue at that point?
We were probably around 35 million.
And one of the things that I'm responsible for staff, and you got 110 people. The responsibility weighs heavy, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you got to meet that payroll, and you're making commitments to bigger office space, and you're making, and so it gets to a point where it's like this machine cannot stop. Right. Did you feel that pressure, or was it something that came easy to you?
No, I think we felt the pressure, man. I mean, people used to always ask me, how many kids do you have? I'm like, either 2 or 108, depending on how you look at it. I mean, so I think that pressure of just knowing that that nut's gonna come due every 2 weeks, and that rent's gonna come due at the first of every month. I mean, I think it's there, but I think that that's also just part of the responsibility that you take on. When you decide to continue to grow, and when you decide to continue to stay in it, and when you decide to kind of push through those hard times and keep this thing going. And I think part of it for me was people ask me all the time. One of the things I was most proud of as an organization was, for those 10 years up until we sold, we never missed a payroll. Sherman and I didn't take money home sometimes. We definitely had some what the fuck conversations with our wives, but our employees never missed a payroll in those first 10 years.
That's a very poignant statement that you just said. The sacrifices you got to make as the entrepreneur. The team can't miss a meal, but the entrepreneur, the boss, has to sometimes.
Sometimes.
So 10 years is going strong. 110 employees, millions of dollars in revenue. You decide it's time to sell.
Yep.
Talk to me about that process, because I know it was a a unique one for the space.
I think it's the nature of the beast, man. I mean, I think most entrepreneurs, go into their situation, at least a lot of entrepreneurs, I think at least with some thought of an exit, right? And I think, you put in the time and the grind to be able to get to a point where you really reap the benefits of that. And I think for us, we had been having conversations and being approached for years and got to a point where, the deal we did, I think felt right at the time. I think the time was right. We had reached that size where it's like, all right, you know what? It's difficult to manage a 110 person organization still operating completely financially independent and all those things. And so I think there were a number. I mean, it was a black owned firm that came to us this time, so there was no question around maintaining our minority ownership, which was still important to us and important to some of our key clients. And so it just felt right, and it was a unique model. These guys wanted to buy us as well as a few other agencies and create what at the time was the largest black-owned holding or minority-owned holding company in the country. And so it was, it was a dope idea conceptually.
So conceptually, right? So well, we'll talk about the first half of the conceptual process. As you said, most entrepreneurs are looking for the right time to exit. Mm-hmm. You think it's the right time. It's key that it allowed for the minority status to be maintained. Yeah. And you were also bringing together other agencies, mm-hmm. Which was going to be unique in the space and allow some real value to be added out into the marketing world. Once the sale took place, I know you went to managing partner at that point in time. Mm-hmm. What level of involvement did you still have to have after that take place?
I mean, I stayed heavily involved in, at this point, the work product, because I didn't have to focus on the running of the organization. So my focus was literally on, as a private equity guys would call it, I was the rainmaker. I was the one that went out and won business and grew business and kept clients happy and made sure that we did amazing work. And so it actually allowed me to lean into the things that I would say arguably are kind of my strongest areas. So that was a good thing about it.
So it takes the pressure of running the business off of you, provides liquidity to you, mm-hmm. And to Sherman, and but you are able to still do what you do best with the organization. That process lasted for how long?
That entire entity lasted for about 18 months.
And that was when the merger took place. That was Common Ground MGS.
Yeah, CGMGS basically. CGMGS.
And that lasted for 18 months.
About 18 months.
And then it went south.
It just didn't work. I'm gonna leave it at that.
Okay.
It just didn't work. For a variety of reasons. I think it's interesting now in a lot of the things that I do with startups and private equity and VCs, and I understand that world and that space so much better in 2021 than I did in 2014. And I think there were red flags that I just didn't know were red flags. You know what I mean? Now looking back on it, but it didn't work. And so what happened was basically that organization completely went away the end of 2015 and presented us with the opportunity to stand up what is now 1035 shortly thereafter.
And so, but I got to imagine that, that had to been a difficult moment for you because that was your baby, right? I mean, you
Common Ground was my baby.
That's what I'm saying. Common Ground was my baby.
Yeah.
And you saw it go from, just you and two other people to 100 people and whatnot. And then kind of in a short amount of period of time, it goes
from 100 to 300 when we did.
Because when the merger
happened, it was 300.
300 people in that.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know, man. I don't spend a lot of time thinking about what could have been, or in a lot of ways what happened. I'm more of a forward-looking person, sometimes to a fault, as my mentors will tell me. But it happened, and it was one of those things where it's like, okay, what are we gonna do? And it was kind of instinctual for me, man, to be honest, to say, we did this once, let's do it again and stand it back up. And we didn't have to, I think some of it was candidly ego. And some of it was understanding that, if we did it once, we can do it again. The marketplace and the opportunity and the need has evolved, but it hasn't gone away. And then candidly, there was still a lot of people that were looking at us like, okay, what are we going to do? And it was still we. And that meant something to me. I think that was a signal for me that I needed to at least make the effort and really put in the work to not try to rebuild, but to try to build something new. And that's, now that's what we've done. That's what we've done. It's interesting. I was having a conversation with Sherman the other day. We're 84 employees now. And I told him I spent a lot of time over the past couple of weeks thinking back to when Common Ground was at 100 and the things that I wish we had thought about and done and the things that worked and went well, because I want to apply that learning and that experience to the growth and the things that are happening right now. And, he and I both, it was interesting. It was actually funny because our teams always, get us in these one-on-ones and they try to ask us the same questions and see if we're on the same page. And they asked us, they were like, what's different now than at Common Ground? And we both gave them the exact same answer. We're like, we're both more mature. We both are, our company is more mature. Like at Common Ground, there was a point in time we knew we were making money. We didn't know how much money we were making. Now there's a discipline and a rigor. I can tell you every month what we're making, and so there's a discipline and a rigor that's come with the second one that has also just come with what I call organizational maturity that we didn't necessarily have at Common Ground. And so I think that, it's the first one should be a jumping off point for the next one, whether you stay in the same business or you go into a different business. As an entrepreneur, you always have those learnings and those experiences that should inform the decisions and the actions that you take as you move forward. And I think that's what we've done.
So 15, 16, you decide to launch 1035. You get to apply the lessons that you've just learned over the past 10 years, 10, 12 years, to your new business. What was like the immediate, we're not going to do it this way again?
Two things. One, don't try to do it solo. And two, don't give up control. And so we took on a holding company partner, but we maintained majority ownership. My thing was in the new thing post Common Ground, my decision-making ability and my power was, somewhat limited because of the structure of the organization. My point was, if I'm going to bet on anybody, I'm going to bet on myself and Sherman. And if we're going to sink, we're going to sink, betting on ourselves. And if we're going to thrive, we're going to thrive, betting on ourselves. And so that was the thing for me, was like, I will never give up control again. But I'm also learned that you don't have to do this. There's ways to have partners, there's ways to have support that enable you to, again, back to what the good thing was about the new entity, was it allowed me to go focus on what I did well. And so it was finding an opportunity in a space where we could check those two boxes.
So when you launched 1035, what are you starting with at that point in time in terms of size of organization and whatnot?
Probably 10, 15, man. 10, 15. Yeah.
So 10 to 15 employees. Yeah. And so you already exponential to where you started Common Ground.
Absolutely. And we had some clients.
We had clients.
There was already a few clients that were like, hey, you know what? It was interesting because, again, back to my whole, very few people want to be first, but everybody wants to be second, third, and fourth. So we had a few clients that rocked with us. And, I think people seeing them, because it was a very public falling apart. So everybody knew that things didn't work. I think very few people know the real story, but everybody knew things didn't work. But to see us kind of back, to see a website come up, to hear us talking about 1035, to, start to kind of see the the rumblings, if you will, of us, kind of being back in the game. I think there were people that wanted to see us win and wanted to see us succeed. And those are the people that I think found ways to help us to continue to build as this thing got going.
And that's probably a testament to the relationships and value you brought in the first stage of Common Ground.
Absolutely.
So, you're getting 1035 off the ground.
Yep.
And you're, trying to continue to add value, grow again. Slower growth this time, more steady growth, quicker growth.
Yes, and I mean, so here's the reality of it, man. I think, the last 18 months have been insane. And I tell people the story in a very kind of, I think, easy to understand narrative. May 24th, the day before George Floyd was killed, I had 25 employees, 5 on furlough, trying to figure out what this COVID thing was going to look like. George Floyd's killed May 25th. June 1st, I believe, was the Monday. My phone started ringing. I've hired employee number 84 last week. And so that's what the past 18 months have been like.
And I can see that because one of the things that I've noticed that, 2020 was the craziest year I can ever remember.
But I tell people, though, if you can find a way to stay focused and be strategic in the midst of chaos, you can win. And that was what we were, I think, able to do. And we had clients and relationships where, I mean, you know what happened in the world, man. Every brand was trying to figure out how to not piss off Black people. And then it was, how do we actually create meaningful relationships with the community and culture? And now it's, how do we do that, but also positively impact our bottom line and make sure that this isn't just a nice thing to do, but it's the right thing to do for our business. And I think we were very well positioned based off of the work that we've done in the years in this space to be able to be a go-to resource for brands that were looking to do that.
Yeah, I tell my team all the time that in moments like these, that's when the next winner is putting the work in,
100%.
is hatching the plan, right?
100%.
You're not going to see it pay off for a year and a half, 2 years, but they were putting the work in while everybody else was being shook.
I mean, when everything happened, we were ready to go. We knew how to scale up. I mean, that's been the question from brands all along, like, how much more can y'all take? And we're like, we good. We built this up to 110 before successfully. So we know how to scale, and we've learned from the process that we went through the last time. And so I think it's been fun, man. It's been a great journey. I mean, we've done some amazing work. We have built a very strong, what I say is the most diverse and probably, I would say, most innovative agencies, 85-person agencies in the industry. And I think we've done it, it's funny. I was having a debate with my team prior to COVID, because we had an office in Chicago, we had an office in Houston. And we were having these conversations about how we could become more integrated as an organization. There's 20 people trying to figure out how to become more integrated as an organization. And I'm trying to tell my teams, like, technology, we got to use technology better. And they're like, no, we need a bigger travel budget, and we got to be able to fly and meet with each other. And now today I'm looking at them like, what were you saying? Like, we grew this shit from our living rooms, and did it successfully and effectively. And now, as the world opens back up, we're figuring out. We're going to stay a part virtual, part in real life organization. Those 85 people are spread out all over the country. Pre-COVID, I had 20 people in Chicago, 5 people in Houston. Now I've got 85 spread out across Chicago, New York, LA, Houston, Atlanta, Miami. But it also opened up the world of talent for us. Because a lot of people don't want to move to Chicago. A lot of people don't want to move to Houston, but they wanted to be a part of what we were building. And so we were able to give them the opportunity to be a part of this culture that we're building as an organization without having to relocate to a space where they may or may not have wanted to live. So it's also opened up the world to us just from a talent standpoint as we've continued to scale the organization.
Might be extremely obvious question, but what value and why is there a need, and what do they do better, a multicultural agency compared to just a traditional marketing agency?
I think the good ones understand culture. Our positioning and our value proposition as an organization is we literally help brands find their voice in culture and help them transform their brands through culture. And so I think it's really understanding the role that culture plays in really kind of helping you grow, not even just with cultural consumers, because we understand that multicultural influence extends well beyond just the communities that create it. And so it's understanding the role that culture can play in helping a brand find their voice to have meaningful relationships with those kind of key multicultural consumers, especially the Black community. But then also being able to bring that to life in a way that has a much broader impact. I mean, when you start to look at younger millennials, when you start to look at, Gen Z, now we're going back to Gen A. I mean, the role that culture plays in their lifestyle is critical. And then if you just look at purely the demographics of the country, right? I mean, ultimately, what was minority is going to be majority very soon nationally, and in many states, California, Florida, Texas. It already is. And so understanding the role that culture plays in helping you connect with what will soon be the majority in the country is just a matter of survival and success for a lot of brands. And so being able to do that in a way where you understand how to speak the language of culture, but you also have to understand how to speak the language of the brand and being able to put that in a context that makes them comfortable, that they can then understand and apply to the things that they learned in B school or wherever else they kind of picked up the skill sets and the ideologies and the filters that they now bring to work every day. That's the secret sauce.
What are you excited about over the next 5 years?
I think I'm really just continue to be excited about this run of what I'm going to call awareness and commitment to having meaningful, impactful relationships with the Black community and the role that we can play in that. I tell my team that we're doing what I consider to be important work every day, whether that's working with, a Pepsi on their Dig In program, which is created to elevate the overall business of Black restaurants, or working with the General Mills on Black Voices Create, or just giving opportunity. One of the things that my business partner and I are doing is really kind of looking for the next Sherman and Ahmad and making sure that they don't have to go through a lot of the bullshit that we went through and just kind of have some of those trials and tribulations, but giving people opportunity to grow and to scale and to continue to thrive. And I think that there is a lot of what created the wave is tragic. And I will say that, and I continue to say that, the death of George Floyd is, without that, I might be sitting at 35, 40 employees, still trying to figure it out coming out of COVID. But I think the wave of interest in culture and community and really kind of brands committing to making that a real part of their overall enterprise is what's exciting. Now, taking that to the next level so that when these 5-year commitments that have been put out are up and people aren't saying, okay, that's it, we're going back to what we were doing, in 2019. No, we have to build the infrastructure and build the foundation so that people understand that investing in culture and investing in the Black community is smart business. And so that's what I'm excited about.
Hey, do you feel it's been sincere?
I think there are organizations that have been very sincere. I think there were organizations that were just trying to keep Black Twitter off their ass. I think there were organizations that needed a catalyst or something to kickstart them getting involved in doing something, and this was it. But I think what keeps people engaged and keeps people committed is business results. Because at the end of the day, that's how people are compensated. That's how CMOs keep their jobs. And so being able to show how a meaningful relationship with culture also has a meaningful impact on the bottom line is going to be the key to long-term success and sustainability in the space.
And on the final question, you've got the opportunity to sit a few future would-be entrepreneurs down in the room. You got to give them the business. What you going to tell them?
Be fearless, but be smart at the same time. And I think that's one of the things I've learned. I look back at some of the walls me and Sherman ran through, and if we had looked at the wall a little longer, we probably could have found a way to go around it. But our fearlessness caused us to run through the wall. And I think, and then I think the biggest piece of advice, though, is you don't have to do it by yourself. I think there's a sense of community that exists around Black entrepreneurs, and an ecosystem and a desire to work together to elevate everyone that didn't exist when we started Common Ground. Candidly, we dealt with, kind of what I call hater culture, a whole bunch of people nipping at our heels, publicly saying they're happy to see us succeed, doing everything they could behind the scenes to see us fail. And I think what you see now is an authentic interest in Black entrepreneurs and even people outside of that circle, but that have the ability to influence their collective success. And I think that that's an important thing, because I think entrepreneurs sometimes feel like they got to hunker down and do it all themselves. I tell all the young entrepreneurs I talk to, figure out what your superpower is, focus on that, and as quickly as you can, outsource the rest of that shit. Whether it's outsourcing it to people that you hire, or just finding partners that can help take those things off your plate. And then whether it's, shared services, whether it's, there's a lot of different ways. There are tons of business models and ways to get business done today that candidly didn't exist or weren't readily apparent in 2004, 2003 when we started Common Ground. And so that's my big piece is, don't do it by yourself. Understand the resources and things that are available to you. But most importantly is lean into your superpower, what makes you unique. And then also, I think I sit down with a lot of entrepreneurs right now, and they have great ideas, but I'm better at articulating their idea back to them than they are to me. You got to know your business. You've got to know, you have to take it beyond just this idea that's in your head and you're passionate about, and you have to be able to start to answer the difficult questions about viability, about profitability, about how you scale it, all those things that the money people are ultimately going to ask you. Get smart on that early on. Those are things that took me at Sherman a while to get to. And so I think being able to have those conversations early on is critical, whether you take that kind of money in or not. It's just that it causes you to have a intimate and really full understanding of your business.
That's Ahmad Islam, co-founder and CEO of 1035. If you would like to hear more about the Black entrepreneurs and business leaders who have made an impact, make sure to subscribe to Give 'em the Business wherever you listen to your podcast. Also, make sure to follow us on social media at Give 'em the Business Podcast. And if you want to send me a message, you can find me at I am Troy D. Evans. Give 'em the Business is produced by Two Common Media. Thanks for listening, and remember to always Troy harder.